In this video, I'm going to go through 4 communication platforms and talk about their pros and cons for communicating with stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder is a key person who's got an interest in your organization. So interest as a word is quite vague, deliberately so, because a stakeholder is anybody who's got any real connection. It might be that they are involved in some way. It might be that they stand to gain or lose through something you are doing as an organization. They are key people. They have got some involvement. They're not just a random person. But examples of stakeholders which are relevant for people working in IT are the clients, the customers, people who are paying for a product or a service, employees, people working for the organization itself, the owners of the company. So stakeholders can be shareholders. Those two words are often confused. A stakeholder is far wider than a shareholder. A shareholder has got some ownership. Governments, it could be the local council, it could be a government department, it could be the local MP. And speaking of local, the local communities, people who live nearby. Because that definition is so wide, there are more stakeholders you could mention, but I think those are the key ones. And as a good functioning organisation, they should be communicated with as clearly and as often as they want. So there are 2 main reasons I think for this. We want to first of all, make sure the stakeholders are kept updated on both positive and negative news. On the positive side, I think that's quite obvious. You want to make sure they are encouraged by what's going on and feel like the organisation is doing a good job. You could quite easily spam these stakeholders with communication about positive things, which might not be necessary, but generally you want to make sure they are aware of the good things going on. Now, negative news might seem a little bit odd. Why would you want to communicate this to stakeholders? And perhaps you wouldn't to all stakeholders, but if the negative news does affect the stakeholders, I'm sure they would much rather know straight away than have to find out from somebody else and have to react and feel aggrieved at not having been communicated with. This is not always optional. If you have a cyber attack, you are obligated in most cases to communicate with your clients who've been affected and also the government in the case of data breaches. But even still, you might tell the owners, you might tell the local communities, just to make sure they are aware and not surprised. The second main reason I think is to make sure you get feedback. You want to improve, and these stakeholders, by definition, have got an interest, and so you want to hear from them. It's not just a one-way communication. You want to hear from them and try and improve based on it. This communication can be done through letters or meetings or events, but we are doing IT, and so looking at the platforms involved and also the channels inside it is the focus for us right now. So starting with platforms, channels will get covered in the next video. The first platform I think is major are websites, because every company pretty much has got a website nowadays. But that's despite them being not very easy to set up. They cost money and you've got to have certain skills to launch a website. You can make a website on your own very cheaply, but ultimately for a big company, it costs a lot of money to run and host the storage and pay people to update it. So here is a snippet from Intel's website. Intel are a major hardware company making processors. Now I picked Intel because I guess they don't necessarily need to have a website. You could argue they do, but it's not key. And on the front page they have things like articles and links to compare their products, which maybe is quite essential, I suppose. But my point is, this is public facing information. They're providing information without anyone asking, really, available to anybody who is visiting their website. So to view this information, you've got to be going on their website. You've got to actively choose to go onto it. Intel can't force you to go on it, but once you are, it's really in their control. So even if they have, say, an article with maybe a comments section, which I don't think Intel do, but some websites do obviously, because you are running the website yourself, you've got control over what people are saying, which from an information management perspective, you want to have as much control because you can make sure you look good and things aren't too negative. This contrasts quite nicely with social media, which you can't control nearly as much in most cases, but at least it is free. I mean, Intel running their Twitter page are paying a team to run it and maybe paying for certain software or advertisements but it's generally free. It's also public facing by and large. I say generally there because you can direct message people in most cases, which is not public facing, it's more targeted, but the general page will be public facing as well. The difference is here, the audience is much bigger. People are on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, probably not just for you, they're doing it for lots of reasons, whereas a website is just for you as a company. So you can't really grow your audience as easily. The downside is that lack of control. If someone replies to your post criticizing you, you can't always just delete it, and it might make you look bad if you're not careful. To look at two more examples, email is also a communication platform. It's quite inexpensive. You are paying as a business for your domain name and for your subscription potentially, but it's not a ton of money. But it is giving out targeted information. An email is going to an individual who has been chosen to get the email, right? It's not just a website which is sat there ready for anyone to view it. This is targeted. That's not to say it's going to just you. An email can go to lots of people at once, for example, newsletters or updates, as in the case of this YouTube message, which went to millions of people, but at least they're targeting just people who make videos, not just anybody who's stumbling on their website or Twitter page. The downside is these are generally not personalized. It might have your name in it, but that might be it. And so you might not react as well to a generic email than you might a personal one. The benefit for the company is replies are kept private. You can't really control who is emailing you unless you block them, but you can at least be assured that people, publicly at least, will not be able to see what's being said. So useful for sending personal information, but also, criticisms can try and be kept off the public facing websites or social media. And finally, let's look at voice communication, which goes a tiny bit beyond just calling somebody up. If you work in a call center, for example, there'll be some software which preloads all of the numbers in. You can call very quickly. You can maybe hold very easily, keep people waiting, and you can see statistics and all that sort of extra information which just a phone would not give you. Now, this is very targeted. Clearly, you're calling one person. You can have, calls in multiple people, but they're quite rare. An email could be going to millions of people, but this is very targeted, aimed at one person, and you can't just fake a phone call unless it's a robot speaking. So these are much more personal, which is good if it's a very sensitive issue or it requires very bespoke intervention, for example, fixing an issue on a device maybe. But it's more time consuming from the person's perspective who's doing the call, and also more costly for the company, having to pay for this time and also paying for the service to be able to call people up like this. Also, it's a bit of a stereotype, but certain demographics will prefer phone calls. I'm thinking of my parents, and even more so my grandparents, who would not want to get an email. They'd much rather get a phone call, which I'm the opposite. But we have got to acknowledge that different people prefer different communication, and if you can tailor it as best you can, it makes it all more effective.